In the last video, we left off in Pandora. In Avatar, preservation becomes the new extermination. But what happens when that's actually successful? What happens when the real dies? What if times are so barren that there's actually nothing left to preserve? In his chapter, History, a Retro Scenario, French theorist Baudrillard, I'm not going to say his first name, delivers one of his most dazzling takes. It took me many tries to gain a foothold in his line of thinking, and I had my understanding altered with every subsequent read. In this video, I'll move us back to planet Earth. If Avatar was about the death of the real, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is about the death of time. The problem that Baudrillard diagnoses is still present, but the same instinct that wished to destroy by protecting now turns its attention to time itself. Let's go through this and how Quentin Tarantino's 2019 love letter to Hollywood is the perfect prism for these ideas. The historical stake chased from our lives by this sort of immense neutralization, which is dubbed peaceful coexistence on a global level and pacified monotony on the quotidian level. This history, exercised by a slowly or brutally congealing society, celebrates its resurrection in force on the screen. So Baudrillard uses the term historical stake here. By this he means weight, things feeling like they matter. The world and our experience of it sits on a knife's edge. Politics that are actually consequential. He reckons that up till the early 20th century this may have actually been the case. People actually went around thinking that if this economic policy was instated or if this social taboo was lifted, their own lives would genuinely be affected for better or worse. It's a different kind of alive you feel when you feel like you have actual agency in shaping the world and its trajectory. But what Baudrillard is not so subtly alluding to here is that this historical stake was neutralized as things got increasingly consumerist and bureaucracy seeped into every last corner of our lives. That's the pacified monotony part of the quote. When exploring Avatar in the last video, I mentioned repeatedly that as humans we have this deep thirst for danger, and when we don't satisfy that yearning, we do project elsewhere to attain it. And in this instance, we celebrated our resurrection in force on screen. The climax of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is an alternative ending to that fateful night that symbolically concluded the torrential 60s. Rather than the Manson family murdering Sharon Tate, in this film the killers break into Leonardo DiCaprio's character's house and engage in slapstick carnage.
No, I was dumber than that.
In Quentin Tarantino's revised version of that night, he explores an intriguing outcome. Sharon Tate lives. She invites DiCaprio up for a drink. She's 26 at this time, but DiCaprio still accepts the invite. Just today, I was reconsidering if this movie actually helps my case and my argument, or if it's so on the nose that it's kind of detrimental and makes the entire argument slip away. I'm not saying that Tarantino is glossing over entertainment and feeding the system accidentally. He explicitly sets out to do this, and he's successful in stylizing the violence. In fact, it's his well-known specialty in all his films. He's just known for this now. He's a master of it. But the confusion lies in the applause. When this film got a 7-minute standing ovation at the Cannes Film Festival, what exactly is it that the audiences were clapping at? History is our lost referential, that is to say, our myth. Think of the modern rationalist. Chances are this person is a self-proclaimed atheist. They pay no lip service to God, but the yearning for an ordering principle still remains. The argument here is that history slyly takes that place. History gives the rationalist the tools by which he can play the unerring cause and effect game once again. Next, the modern rationalist will show you this profound quote: "Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." For them, history is their illusion of progress. We live in a world where there is more and more information and less meaning. Think of 24-hour news cycles, or even think of that one person you know that talks so much and so long that they actually end up saying nothing.
Sometimes I'll start a sentence, and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
The Manson murders are so over-documented in American history that it doesn't even faze us anymore. It's a pop culture relic, and that's exactly where Tarantino jumps in to capitalize rather elegantly. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a version of this idea. The sense of inconsequentiality we feel, desensitized to everything. Inglourious Basterds is, I think, an even better execution and presentation of this idea. But continuing on this idea of history as the lost referential and, more newly, our myth, Baudrillard then derides the critics that give cinema credit for claiming to foreground a historical event. He says, "The illusion would be to congratulate oneself on this awareness of history on the part of cinema." After that, Baudrillard addresses how we fetishize the past, despite its violence, because at least we felt something. For him, that's what nostalgia is. It's a sentiment, it endlessly accumulates over time, and it acts as a one-stop shop or a palliative to escape our malaise. We see this everywhere in mainstream culture. Old, dusty bookstores that we try to convince ourselves are actually awesomer and better than actual, new, clean ones that you can stand in without disintegrating on the spot. Or in the case of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, drives down Hollywood Boulevard, being on set for a Western film, Sharon Tate watching her own movie. So Quentin Tarantino is perfectly positioned here for acclaim. The more he smashes Hollywood over the head with a shovel, the more praise he gets. The more people come out of the cinema saying, he did such a good job recreating that world, didn't he? And the answer is yes, he did. The more he milks the Hollywood cash cow for every last drop, the more the Hollywood lovers in turn love him back. What a time to be alive, seriously. I think Mr. Koothrappali puts it best when he says, "Then there's the ways in which we unconsciously revive the past." I'm going to use the example of dating apps. I've been wanting to use this somewhere for a long time, so strap in. Remember arranged marriages? It was the norm throughout the world and most cultures for the longest time. In much of Africa and Asia, it still is. We would organize potential matches by caste, family, occupation, and status. What can they provide for us? How would my life be better if I married them? In short, compatibility, as we deemed fit, was the barrier to even meeting this person in real life. Then we had the rebels. You can't reduce a person to metrics, facts, and factors that they can't change, they said. People are infinities. Then came the rom-coms. To love was to meet organically, accidentally. Ideally, you'd bump into the love of your life at the supermarket somehow. But now we've done a full circle. The dating apps are digital arranged marriage markets. You filter by your criteria, and now are even more savage, unrelenting, and unapologetic about them. But this is the Baudrillardian twist. We haven't simply done a full circle and returned to the old ways. We wish it was that simple. Like I've said many times, in simulation theory, the return is entirely illusory. We now engage in the most bastardized form, even of arranged marriages, because previously, at least our loved ones did the arranging. Now it's the machine, now it's the algorithm. Even that personal touch, however horrifying, however stultifying it was in the past, has been taken from you, and under the guise of freedom nonetheless, reality, self-expression, under these labels. So later in this chapter, in Simulacra and Simulation, Baudrillard uses Freud's fetishism theory to delineate our obsession with the past in keeping with this idea of nostalgia. I don't particularly care for this idea, or Freud for that matter, but it serves Baudrillard's argument well, so I'll run through it quickly. Supposedly, we long for periods like the 90s so much because it was the final safe thing that we can remember before we just got entirely swallowed and subsumed. The theory goes that in our period of irreferentials, or the postmodern condition just more generally, We long for the last known period of referentials, so that in our case is the time that immediately precedes us. History thus made its triumphal entry into cinema, posthumously. Cinema now feels like a memorial. Cinema is now just the news team that comes to record in the aftermath. It doesn't feel like it's actively involved as a participant in culture. But Baudrillard reckons this wasn't always the case. This does not signify that history has never appeared in cinema as a powerful moment, as a contemporary process, as insurrection and not as resurrection. He continues, Barry Lyndon is the best example. One never did better. One will never do better in what? Not in evoking, not even in evoking, in simulating. Replication through simulation is an issue that people bring up all the time throughout music history. Famed Led Zeppelin drummer John Bonham had an undeniable feel to his drumming, rhythm, and overall music playing in the 1970s. So when quantizing came around in the 1990s and percussion got mechanically put onto a grid to ensure that everything lined up, many argued that the entire feel and the purpose of the music was lost. It no longer breathes. You can't put a rock drummer on a grid, especially not one with impeccable feel and timing. Someone like John Bonham, as Led Zeppelin fans will tell you to death, even if you don't want to hear about it. It's just antagonistic to the genre as a whole to mechanize it. And Bonham in particular displayed a great skill in something that many drummers have tried to replicate, which is something that I've been calling playing perfectly out of time. So he's actually lazy if you put him to a grid. He's behind the beat, but apparently that's what people deeply want. Cool, cold pleasure, not even aesthetic in the strict sense. Functional pleasure, equational pleasure, pleasure of machination. So Baudrillard closes this section pretty poetically, describing the difference between the pleasure you get when you get an OCD of yours scratched versus the wonder, the awe that you feel towards art. One is a purely algorithmic pleasure, the type you get when you watch like a YouTube unboxing video. It's consumptive, everything aligns so perfectly, it just makes you want to squeal. Tarantino films are like that. They're an exquisite balance, they're an equation that can't have the terms shifted too much here or there. In this world, logic and rationality beat intuition and passion every freaking day of the week. So I touched on the Quentin Tarantino perfect replication paradox before, but something people often say is they disliked a movie because it just wasn't realistic.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
The cinema and its trajectory, from the most fantastic or mythical to the realistic and the hyper-realistic. So chances are, if you're watching this video and you're this far in, you've likely heard the Marshall McLuhan words, the medium is the message. Here we see the genealogy of that. So Baudrillard describes kind of the structural relation that cinema has held to the real as we know it. The first relation is the mythic. This is when the film is the medium, and the message the film depicts is, let's say, from the dream world. It's flooded with symbolic imagery. We need a way to formulate that, to make it palatable such that it's comprehensible to cinema goers. So the film gives form to the largely formless, the dream. In other words, it provides a shell for the archetype to be encased in. After the mythic, we encounter the realistic. This is when films start to have more of a documentary feel. They're a mirror now to the sense impressions you already collect as you go about your day as a human being. After the realistic is the hyper-realistic. It no longer just imitates. The film is no longer the medium. This obsession cinema has with veracity, as he puts it, is a terror. I'm reminded of the makers of a film proudly announcing that their work is based on a true story. And the audience feels this afterwards, remarking, yeah, that was a great watch because that is how that night happened. Or, in the case of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, yeah, that was a great watch because that isn't how it happened. To me, this resembles the classic divide between the sitcom Friends and Seinfeld. One banks on relatability and the other is the precise opposite. It banks on unrelatability. For people that find Friends funny, one reason is because when they see a character in a situation react to something or a stimulus hits them, they think, that's funny because that's exactly how that situation would go. If I was in that situation, that's how I would react and how the situation would play out. On the other hand, with Seinfeld, that's funny because that's not how that would go at all. Tarantino is notorious for being a megalomaniac, a filmmaker, like James Cameron in the last video, who gives meticulous attention to detail. This fuels the observation and the folklore surrounding him. The standout words in this history and cinema tirade Baudrillard gives are, in its pretension to be the real, the immediate, the unsignified, which is the craziest of undertakings. It's really crazy to me when someone exercises just absolutely no skepticism whatsoever in their thought. They present their idea as if they're just giving it to you straight from the horse's mouth. Now, mind you, we also don't want to be this guy. I know I'm jumping everywhere here, but back to Simulacra. Cinema plagiarizes itself, recopies itself, remakes its classics, retroactivates its original myths, remakes the silent film more perfectly than the original, etc. All of this is logical. The cinema is fascinated by itself as a lost object as much as it and we are fascinated by the real as a lost referent. To end off, intentionally or unintentionally, Baudrillard is actually kind of funny here. He says, history is a strong myth, perhaps along with the unconscious, the last great myth. That's about as funny as a person like him can get. If myths once gave order to our lives, today we trace neat lines of causality throughout history. This happened, so that happened, and that's how I got here. Thank goodness I cracked that. In the 21st century, we think history has removed myth out of the equation. But Baudrillard remarks that history hasn't actually removed anything, it's only replaced myth. The labels of categories are what has changed, that's all. He would sympathize with the following line. The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Spoken by Edward Wilson. At the base level, that is, at the level of pathos, instinct, drive, feeling, perhaps we aren't as evolved as we think we are. Post-God, is history our only remaining guarantee? Man, whenever I put my finger on a part of reality, it slips away. I don't know about anything else, but at least history happened. This next part is a bit outside the scope of this video, but before we close the loop on this, we'll give this a try. Here's a concept to consider. You'll remember being taught in school the equation speed equals distance over time. We classically view time as the container of being. Our verbiage is such that movement happens in time. But aren't these movements the very thing that time is later labeling? Isn't time the thing that is derived from the movement? The counter to this is, but doesn't there first have to be a moving object whose speed we're calculating by dividing distance by time? But the counter to that counter is, you can only comprehend a moving object if the space around it is fixed. The point is, have we made the infamous mistake that Baudrillard points out at the start of this book? In the case of time, have we mistaken the map for the terrain? Time makes constant transformation intelligible to us. That doesn't mean it's causing it. I'll talk more about this in upcoming Wittgenstein and Deleuze videos. But this is where the depth of history pertaining to cinema begins to make sense to us. It's not the end of events, it's the end of duration itself. Quentin Tarantino utilizes the art form most dripping with mythic potential to reanimate one of the already most photographed moments in history, and produces possibly the most magnificent dead corpse you'll ever see. It's 2 parts impressive, 1 part silly, and I don't know what else to say to that. So, in the last video, if you remember, the blue people were doomed in Avatar the minute they were exposed, causing the death of the real. In the case of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's history itself that's doomed when a movie is made on it. It's the death of time. Baudrillard is critical of humans' strange fascination with just not letting something be, and then when it dies, we don't even let it peacefully die. And if you think that's grim, strap in, because that's only just the beginning. Once you can resurrect time, it's only a matter of time until you reach the next miracle of simulation. Creation without a creator, life without birth. Stay tuned for my take on the clone story, Jurassic Park.